Hello, everyone. Today I'd like to review a little section of A Realm Reborn that I don't think I've really heard a lot of people talking about. I suppose it might be a very boring subject, but maybe some of you might be interested in talking about the Hall of the Novice. I just really like that piece of content, and I'm going to explain today why I like it, why I think it's great, why I think A Realm Reborn does a really good job helping complete noobs, and ways that I think would really improve on this piece of content, because I do think that there are some improvements that could be made, and I might have some other opinions about the Hall of Novice that might get some people thinking about how to educate gamers in-game about how to play the game well. So let's first begin with the very simple question, what is the Hall of the Novice? So in case you haven't done this side content, basically, right before you go into Sestasha, the MSQ tells you to go to Aleport, and you basically end up going to the Hall of Novice. And they encourage you to take a short course that focuses on your particular role in the game. So, as you know, Final Fantasy XIV follows the Holy Trinity of tank, healer, and DPS. So depending on what your class is, they're going to give you specific lessons in that particular class and how to get through managing certain things that are going to happen in the dungeon. It's learning about how to work with a team. It's learning about how to dodge AoEs, how to use your rotation while at the same time clicking levers and protecting the healers and properly attacking the stuff that the tank has aggroed. And it even teaches you how to be a good tank or how to be a pretty good healer. Now, this is all super basic stuff, so maybe some of you haven't actually done the Hall of Novice. It is, after all, to a certain degree, side content. They don't force you to do it, but it's right there, and they heavily encourage you to do it by promising some really good gear. And they aren't lying. The gear is actually really good. And it's really nice looking gear as well. You really want to get that gear so you could put it in your glam as soon as possible, because it just looks really nice at the early levels. So, do I enjoy the Hall of the Novice? Yeah, I actually do. So even if I leveled my alts, I still did the Hall of Novice for the gear. It's really very short and sweet. I think the DPS courses, there's like 7 of them. You can get them mostly done within, I think, about half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. I don't think it's really that long. That could be even too long for what I'm saying it is. Like maybe I got it done in less time. Depends on how much you fail, I suppose. But I really enjoy doing it because it's just a good refresher and it's a great way to get some nice gear early on. So why do I think Hall of Novice is so great? Well, for obvious reasons. I think it's just great for complete noobs. If you've never played a tap targeting game like Final Fantasy XIV before, you are going to be really just confused about how you're going to manage in the dungeon. For some people, it's just a good idea to learn how to work with other people, even if it's just NPCs, and understanding what you're going to face when you go in there. So learning about AoE patterns, learning about dodging, and they really drive into you things like protect the healer. So if the tank doesn't pick up the aggro for a mob and the mob starts attacking the healer, they encourage you to kill that mob as fast as you can. So they really drum into you how to carry yourself in the dungeon depending on your role. And like I said, this is a really nice, simple, straightforward, hands-on experience of getting you used to very basic dungeon challenges that you might face, especially in the early dungeons. They set you up to understand how things are going to work in the dungeon, and it really helps most early players feel confident before going into a dungeon. And as I noted before, on top of that, it gives you great gear that looks nice and actually is quite well leveled for that particular level. So Realm Reborn in this case for me does a lot of great things. And If you're still feeling, nervous about going into a dungeon, there are other ways in A Realm Reborn to help you get ready and kind of cope before going in there. So, for example, there are Guildleves that you can do quite early on. There are leave meets that you can do that basically will pit you against very special foes and missions. And of course, if you're really scared and you don't think you're going to be able to cope well with going in with real players, you can use duty support when you run your dungeons. Now, a lot of people might go, well, what's the big deal about this? Well, first off, learning from a dialogue box is just not fun. These various opportunities or ways to approach this content is just really great for giving you hands-on experience. And I also think it makes it more exciting. You start to feel like things are happening. After all, this is an MSQ heavy type of game, so this kind of stuff really needs to be approached carefully, because you don't want to just throw your players from doing stories and simple, solo duties into a dungeon without any preparation, particularly if these people are completely new to the game. So when my sister first began the game, she was just diving right in. She got into it right away. But even so, I would have to give her small tips. And I did not let her escape the Hall of the Novice. She went and did that because I told her it's going to get you good gear and it's going to make you feel really confident about going into your first dungeon. And it certainly did work. She was still a bit nervous, but she did so well. She was getting all the comms. Now, is the Hall of Novice perfect? No. So when you first enter in, there's going to be someone who starts talking to you. And if you're not used to it, you're going to completely miss the text boxes that are timed. Now, the text boxes will repeat, but it is very easy to kind of get caught up and get flustered and to not notice the very specific instructions that they're giving you. So in this case, I would make the instruction boxes of the person at the gate, I would make them clickable and not, repeating on a loop. And then, of course, they could say, would you like to see the instructions again? And then you could say yes and reread it again. Also, it would be really great if they had a voiced character giving quiet, calm suggestions for those who might get confused in the arena. So once you enter into the actual instance and you go into the arena, it would be great if you could have one of the characters be like, okay, now time to avoid that AoE and just very quietly and very calmly remind some of the noobs how to cope with what's happening. Because if anyone has watched a complete noob playing the game, it can actually be very overwhelming. Like, I know some of you out there are just probably rolling your eyes and being like, how could you mess this up? I highly recommend watching something like Preach's wife, Emma, who is this fantastic lady, and she's so courageous. She's throwing herself, well, she was throwing herself into the MSQ. I don't know if she's still streaming her journey, but the Hall of the Novice was a real mind flip. And I could see that she was very much like me, where she's not afraid to get her hands dirty. She's not afraid to try something new, but it can be very overwhelming at the beginning. And it's going to even get worse when you hear stories about how toxic people can be, and then you are literally too scared to go into the dungeon. And that is actually a whole thing that happened with Emma. She was like, oh, should I go in? Should I go in? Maybe I should do the NPCs. And she was very, very scared about running in the dungeon with real people, because a lot of people don't talk about this, but women have very strong sensitivity to what people think about them. And so if even a woman is going to be worried about, I shouldn't even have to say even a woman, because that's just stupid, right? But all humans will have struggles with not feeling like they're doing something right, especially if they're mature individuals and they're confident and they're very good at other areas of their life. They might struggle with feeling vulnerable and silly and stupid when they're going into something completely new. There's a reason why people often don't try new things. It's because trying new things makes them feel dumb and makes them feel less than. It's healthy to try new things, but it's just not very common, right? It's not very, relaxing. So once again, having the Hall of the Novice right there is a great way to encourage complete noobs who are completely new to the system to feel more comfortable. And of course, it would be really great if there was some voiced lines that could help the true blue noobs to kind of get through that whole thing. And another thing that I think would maybe be very helpful is, and this is where maybe some people will agree with me, maybe some people won't agree with me, is that they should have new courses at the Hall at the end of A Realm Reborn, at the end of level 50, and then at the end of Stormblood, and then at the end of Endwalker. So every 2 expansions, they should have these Hall of Novice courses that you can take. And the reason why I'm suggesting this is, first off, there are sometimes players who return after a long time, and they might want to brush up on their knowledge base and want to make sure that they are fresh and ready to go into a new difficult dungeon. So this is a really great way to kind of freshen up your knowledge base and your abilities. And these higher level visits to the Hall would cover less well-known mechanics or future mechanics that are going to pop up in the game, because as the game progresses, you start seeing very, very new mechanics. One of the funniest things and most sad things to see is tanks not standing together under tank busters, the shared tank busters. In Good King Moogle there is a moment where the tank needs to stand with the other tank, and you can tell when the tanks are new and don't know what they're doing. It's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. But it would just be so helpful if we could let the tanks realize why that happened. For example, there are certain mechanics like the rush mechanic. So what some people often don't realize is that you will see a very long rectangular AoE on the ground, and a character may be paralyzed or stuck in place or free roaming, but they are attached more or less to this big creature. Usually it's a buffalo or a cow or an elephant or something. And they're going to, the animal is going to rush the player. And what a lot of people don't know, is that other players need to actually stand before the stuck player and help take the brunt of it. And we were in a dungeon one time, my sister and I, and we found this out from trial and error. And I looked it up, and we discovered that we were both right. Like, we needed to do this. I forget what it was. It might have been like Dusk Vigil or something like that. And we realized, OMG, you need to like help each other by standing in front of the downed player. One time she was in a dungeon on her own, and my sister was like, hey, can someone like help me out here? And they were like, what are you doing? And she was like, you need to like step in front of me and help me take the brunt of it. And they were like, what? You don't do that. And this was a player who had been playing for over 5 or 10 years. Like this player was like, I've been playing this for blah, 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 since blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah. And then they went online, like they went on, I guess they went away for a little second and checked. And then they came back and they were like, oh, so maybe we need the Hall of Novice at later expansions. And these higher level Halls of Novice would have rewards, very good incentives to actually complete them, maybe like a special glam, or for example, like maybe certain materia that is more difficult to get, something like that. And I would advocate that the later Hall visits for, let's say, the end of Stormblood and the end of Endwalker would be really punishing, like super punishing. And maybe you could opt to do these Hall visits with, let's say, certain scions or certain NPCs from the game, just to make it interesting and fun. So I do recommend actually continuing on with the Hall of Novice at later junctures, just so that everyone is up to date and knows everything. There's things that I still don't know, and it would just be so helpful to make sure everyone's on the same board for just even the basics, not the special stuff. That would take away the mystery of doing ultimates and savages. I don't want to I don't want to take away the mystery and the puzzle solving, because that's part of the grind, right? But there needs to be coverage of basics, like really. So basically, I think the Hall of Novice is great. There are certain MMO critics. My favorite is Josh Strifehaze, and he often talks about how he dislikes tutorials at the beginning of games and MMOs, where it's just dialogue boxes clogging you up with text info that you're expected to read. Your eyes are literally glazing over. You just feel overwhelmed. You just want to do something. And critics like these, like Josh Strifehaze, they are correct. You learn best by doing things. But sometimes doing it alone without other people is really the best way for you to learn, because trying to learn something with other people can feel very terrible and awful, and it can lead to toxic behavior from either the person who's struggling or from people around who don't have the time and patience to deal with that person who is struggling. So, for example, one time, I'll probably mention this story on multiple occasions, but I had just started Sage. I queued in for some leveling, and for whatever reason, I queued into Katana Ravel. And it was my second time doing the dungeon. I had initially done it as a summoner, and I had not done it again. So this was my second time doing that dungeon, and it was my first time doing it as a healer. And it was only probably within the first 10 dungeons of running as a sage. So as you can imagine, I started sweating. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to keep everyone on their feet. I'm just going to try to do my best. And one of the DPS was like, DPS more. Use your buttons. Why aren't you using your buttons? Why aren't you doing more damage? And it was just constant nagging. And it got to the point where I tried to do more DPS, and the party wiped twice. I just couldn't keep people alive and do good DPS. And when we got to the end, I was shaking. And the tank and the other DPS were so supportive and were like, hey, what's up? Like, is everything okay? And I was like, this is my first time running it as a sage and my second time running it overall. I'm so sorry. Like, I'm going to work hard. And the other DPS was like, easiest blacklist ever. And then left. And I was so crushed. I couldn't heal for the next 2 weeks. And it shouldn't have gotten to me, but it did. Because I've always struggled with performance anxiety. Especially as a kid, I always felt terrible about myself if I didn't do well. Maybe it's an eldest child kind of syndrome. I don't know. But anyway, I was so crushed. I didn't even white mage, which was my main, which I actually was doing better at. And from that time onward, I never ran a dungeon with real people the first time. So from I think it was like from patch 5.3 all the way through Endwalker, I would never play with another human player the first time in a dungeon. I would, and Endwalker dungeons for me were very difficult. So I would not play with any human party until I could go through the dungeon with NPCs, with the trust system, without dying as a summoner. And then this meant, therefore, that I couldn't do roulettes as a healer. I couldn't level any of my healing classes in the roulettes because I was so afraid of accidentally getting a level 90, in the roulettes. It was very silly. But maybe that will give you a little glimpse as to what can go on in your head if you are particularly sensitive about criticism in terms of your gameplay, right? Because once again, I'm aware that people are spending their precious spare time to run a dungeon with you, and the last thing they want to do is to have stupid goof ups, right? So I recognize that, and because I recognize that, I am always really worried. Am I healing well? Am I doing the right amount of DPS, etc., etc.? And, my experiences, by the way, that wasn't my only time. More recently, there was this one person who was just like shit healer and then left. And I was like, I spiraled for about half an hour and then I came out of it. So I've gotten better. I've gotten stronger, and I've learned to shake it off and be like, that person's just having a bad day. I did my best. They need to get a grip. But this is why I really think it's important to have something like the Hall of Novice. And this is why I think A Realm Reborn is so fantastic. I don't care what people say about it being too slow. I think it was perfect, especially for someone like me who needs that slowness, because if you're coming straight out of like other games and going for your first time into a tab targeting game, then this is very crucial. You need to have something like the Hall of Novice. And I think you should have more Hall of Novice. I am advocating for more Hall of Novice because it would help me as a healer or wannabe healer. And it would help, I think, a lot of other players to get better. Now, Preach one time responded to someone in his chat recently. He said something like, he was responding to a chatter saying something like, maybe you can educate the players. And he was like, bro, you can't educate MMO gamers. He's not wrong. I think bad MMO players will always be bad MMO players. But I would bet that there are a large portion of players who are like me who want to get better. And so they just need that extra bit of help over a long term, not just at the beginning. And so having these sporadic Hall of Novices throughout the expansions, not for every expansion, but throughout the expansions, having a sporadic Hall of Novice to visit, I think would be so helpful. I will say that A Realm Reborn, having the trust or NPC system where you can run a dungeon with the NPCs, is also fantastic. I know that there are a lot of players who complained about the lack of content in Endwalker, and there was a lot of talk about how Final Fantasy XIV is losing its MMO feel. And this could be true to a certain degree, but my argument, however, remains that having that solo content there is very crucial, because there are people out there who are new, completely new, or who struggle with anxiety or struggle with performing under pressure, who are going to really rely on those systems to enjoy the game. And I know that there are some gamers out there who are like, well, you got to get good. Yes, I agree. Like, we shouldn't be hand-waving away bad playing habits. And I do think it's very important as an individual, when you are individuating, when you're maturing, you're learning and you're pushing yourself and you're making yourself feel uncomfortable so you can grow. However, if you want to encourage MMO content, you're going to have to contend with the inevitable toxicity that rises when you have impatient people, bad people, people just having a bad day. These are not the same. Or bad people having a bad day. That's even the worst, right? But you're going to have to deal with the fact that there are going to be toxic elements. They do exist in Final Fantasy XIV. They are out there. You play long enough and you'll find them. And honestly, you can't brush that off all the time for some people. So for me, I think A Realm Reborn does a fantastic job in providing all of these supports: the Hall of Novice, the Guildleves, the Leave Meets, the duty support for the dungeons. It's giving all the tools to anxious new players to get better. So it's on every player to get better. However, I do think that having the duty support in particular is so helpful. And I think it is really super helpful for helping with some people who might struggle with more performance anxiety or social anxiety than usual. And so while I am looking forward to seeing how the Final Fantasy XIV team makes Final Fantasy XIV more of an MMO than ever, I do think that in order for it to pursue that goal, it was very crucial for it to also have these systems in place so that certain people can absent themselves, if necessary, from multiplayer content before inflicting themselves on the general population with their playstyle. And once again, I'm not trying to justify poor playing or bad attitudes about learning. I'm not trying to justify you don't pay for my sub behavior. But at the same point in time, I am trying to hopefully give a window into why I think these systems, like the Hall of Novice and duty support and Guildleves, are so brilliant and so important to an MMO, and why we should really be thankful about these very simple things that maybe not a lot of gamers think about, but new gamers, newbies coming in will really appreciate this kind of content. Particularly if they are like me, if they're invested in becoming better players, they will really, really appreciate slowly dipping themselves into team building strategies, into coping with dungeon mechanics, into working with other people. It does help. Very experienced but impatient players, no. But it does help a little bit. And it at least fills you with some confidence before you go into Sestasha. You're going to feel confident, and that's why I really love the Hall of Novice. I really hope they keep the Hall of Novice going forward. And I really, really hope that maybe one day they could put in more Halls of Novices so that people can learn how to do their job even better. And I think that would just fill everybody with more confidence and make sure everyone's on the right page. So anyway, what do you think? Do you think the Hall of Novice is important? Did you do the Hall of Novice? What would you change about the Hall of Novice if you could? And would you agree with me that we should have more Halls of Novice? Do you think that would even help with the whole situation or not? Anyway, I realize I kind of went off about duty support, but I think there is a lot of talk right now about how solo play is da-da-da. But for me, I think solo play is part of an emergent behavior where if you, how can I say this? If you are more sensitive or if you just want to get something done, I think having the duty support is so crucial. And I'm so glad that CPU3 took the time to go back and buff up all of that kind of duty support stuff. My only wish is they could do more for the whole Hall of Novice. Make it more. Just put more of it. And maybe with the right incentives, more and more people can practice and understand some less well-known mechanics, and maybe dungeon farming will be less painful for everyone involved. Anyway, well, that's about it for today. Next time I'm going to be touching on Sestasha and Tamterra Deepcroft and Copperbell Mine, I believe. And so I'm going to be looking at the dungeons next, the early dungeons, and talk about them. And also on top of that, I just want to thank everyone who has subscribed, who has been commenting. I honestly find a lot of encouragement from all of you, and it's got me thinking about how to take my YouTube a bit more seriously. I'm also hoping to start up a Discord. In this Discord, we would be able to chat together about books that we enjoy or whatever. And I will be offering opportunities for people to submit their writing so that I can do some beta reading for them. I can't promise to be able to read scads and scads of writing because I have my own work, sadly, to do on the side. But hopefully we will be able to meet up somewhere on Discord or something. And maybe at some point when I get better internet, I might even be doing a few streams where we could watch me die a gajillion times in Elden Ring, or or continue to work through BFA, because I have been doing a bit of BFA lately, which is a whole other thing. And what else? Yeah, I don't know, but I'm very excited to see where I can take this channel. And if you continue enjoying this content, think about leaving a subscribe, a little click on the like button, and I will see you all next time. Take care.